Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners. The waiver wire heading into week 6, maybe one of the most important waiver wires that we've had so far this season, because this is the first week we're heading into bye weeks. We got 4 teams missing this week, and that could mean for you multiple guys that you have to replace in your lineup. And if you've been having any trouble with your bench, or really don't even have that deep of a bench, you might need to grab some guys to help you get through the week. So this is going to be one of the bigger videos that we've had this year in terms of finding some streamers, finding guys that can help your team throughout the week, some guys that you can look forward to grabbing maybe in upcoming weeks, whatever it may be. We're going to have running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, streaming options for quarterback and defensive special teams, and then maybe a few players that we need to think about dropping coming up very soon. But ladies and gentlemen, hit the like button for me. Subscribe if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners. And in the comments down below, if you've got even a question about someone you may or may not need to drop, make sure you ask before you just do something that could ruin your team for the rest of the year. Let's go ahead and hop into it now. We're going to talk about running backs to get the week started. From Washington, Brian Robinson. Now, it looks like on a majority of platforms, he's probably going to be close to being 65-70% owned. Some people had dropped him, tried to get him back. He was kind of out of mind for a while. Antonio Gibson, an okay start to the season, I think kind of led to that a little bit. And then obviously with how well the passing game was over the first couple of games, people may have kind of pushed it to the side. But now Brian Robinson is back. And I think the biggest thing to see from Brian Robinson is this guy is coming back from an injury in which he was shot multiple times, and in his first game back this season, out carried Antonio Gibson. So everything that we saw in the preseason leading up to now, talking about how Brian Robinson was going to start stealing Antonio Gibson touches, is already happening. A guy working his way back from gunshot wounds, out carrying Antonio Gibson. I mean, it's crazy to see, but again, I think the writing has been on the wall the entire time that this was something that was going to happen. Kenneth Walker III is going to be my Fantrax find of the week. And believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, Kenneth Walker is actually just under 50% owned on almost all major fantasy platforms. Crazy. This was a guy that was drafted ahead of Rashad Penny by most people to start the fantasy season. And then Rashad Penny comes out. Obviously, Kenneth Walker gets hurt, so he misses kind of that late training camp, early beginning of the season. He works his way back. Penny has some really big games. People bounce Kenneth Walker off of their lineup, and now all of a sudden, Rashad Penny is beat up and probably done for the year, it sounds like, from what I read earlier. And now Kenneth Walker is going to be the guy in Seattle. There's going to be people running to grab him this week if he has somehow made it into the waivers. I mean, number one priority this week is going to be Kenneth Walker. Number one priority. I don't know how much I can stress that. It doesn't matter how good your running back depth is. It doesn't matter what you have on your team. It doesn't matter if you have any other priorities. You are getting Kenneth Walker with your number one waiver pick this year, because he is a guy that, as the season goes on, could give us some low-end RB1 numbers at certain points, especially with how well Geno Smith has been playing. We've seen in some of these easier matchups Rashad Penny have a good game. Kenneth Walker is going to be right in there. He's going to be a guy that you could use as trade bait maybe in a week or two after a big game. He could help reinforce the depth on your bench. These are the kind of game-changing pickups that we are able to grab mid-season. And for you, if you're able to get them, this is good news for you. Raheem Mostert, Miami, taking over, is the lead back. Still sitting around 60% owned on most major platforms, it appears. He needs to be added now, though. He's clearly the lead back. I mean, Chase Edmonds, he's going to the wayside. Now, I don't know. I didn't specifically see anything saying that Chase Edmonds had any issues. I don't know if it had to do with the score, but the dude saw less touches than Myles Gaskin. Yeah, Myles Gaskin, that guy. Remember him as somebody that we tried drafting last year, completely off the radar all season, now even getting more touches than Chase Edmonds. Raheem Mostert is the guy. Last week, 18 carries, 113 yards, and a touchdown. He's going to be the guy moving forward And as soon as Tua gets healthy and he gets back, as soon as the wide receivers are feeling a little bit more healthy, then that's going to make Mostert even a better opportunity play each and every week for some upside. Caleb Huntley for Atlanta. Now, Tyler Algier is too highly owned at this point because he was the main guy that was grabbed last week for those of you that were looking for running back depth. But also on last week's video, I tried to tell you about Caleb Huntley, and for those of you in deeper leagues to take a shot at him. Now, he looks a little bit better than Algier so far. Over the last couple of weeks, he has looked a little bit better. And if we don't see Tyler Algier start to kind of climb the efficiency totem pole in Atlanta, it could lead to more touches for Caleb Huntley. I mean, Caleb Huntley's long last week was 22 compared to Algier's 17, and he also averaged 4.3 yards per carry compared to the 3.5 for Algier. And if you remember last week, we talked about it. Algier's day was basically made on one run. Huntley was more consistent on all of his carries, whereas all of Algier's basically production came on one big run. That's something for us to really keep in mind. If Atlanta's going to continue to run as much as they are, which I believe that they will, we're going to see Huntley start to make his way into the rotation if Algier isn't a guy that takes off. So keep this in mind. Keep an eye on Huntley. Again, Cordero Patterson probably only going to miss a few weeks at this point, but those things are always up and down. He could end up missing a couple of more weeks, and we're going to be able to utilize one of these guys. So keep an eye on that. And then Eno Benjamin, a guy that in the draft a couple of years ago, Jake and I actually liked. We had a chance to actually be there. We were at his interview. Eno had some really, really good responses to questions about really what's going to make him a really good NFL player. And just listening to him talk, you could tell that this was a guy that takes his job serious, that he studies and studies and studies, and he works at his craft, and he does all these things. So I'm really hoping that Eno starts to get a little bit more work in Arizona, and we might be headed to that right now. I mean, Eno only saw one less carry than James Conner last week, and he scored a touchdown. And then he also had 4 targets compared to Conner's 1 target. If this is an offense that continues to struggle, that is going to be playing from behind at times, Eno Benjamin is a guy that I think we're going to see on the field a little bit more and a little bit more often, especially in those third down, long down situations where they could be passing the ball. Benjamin's going to be a guy that's going to step in and help in that area. I fully believe that. But with James Conner as well, we know this is a guy that gets beat up and he gets knocked around a little bit. And when those things happen, Atlanta might feel the need to kind of back off of him a little bit. So Eno Benjamin is a guy that could become very, very useful, especially for you James Conner owners. If we're grabbing him right now on a shorter bench, it's probably going to be a little bit of a waste of a spot to begin with. But as the season goes on, or if you have a deeper bench, he's a guy that we definitely have to have roaming around our lineup for sure. Lots of wide receivers to talk about this week. Lots of them. Darius Slayton, a name that we haven't talked about in a very long time. Once was a breakout candidate last year and a guy that we thought could take the next step in New York, and now he's getting another opportunity. New York decimated with wide receiver injuries. Everybody on the wide receiver side seems to be beat up there. Led the team this past week with 7 targets. Only had 2 the week prior to that. But this is a guy that, again, as long as Kadarius Toney is hurt, as long as Kenny Golladay isn't performing, as long as Sterling Shepard obviously out the rest of the year, Darius Slayton's going to be a guy that's going to start making his way back into the conversation for wide receiver 1 on his team. Now, will he produce, decent numbers? That's yet to be seen because a lot of that's based on Daniel Jones, and that's not the greatest in the world. Yes, the Giants are winning right now. Yes, the Giants are playing very well. Daniel Jones, I wouldn't say, is a big part of that. He is still very inconsistent. So with that is going to come inconsistent performances from Darius Slayton. Alec Pierce. Definitely a guy that's got to be added on all major platforms this week. I've brought his name up a couple of times in the past. A couple of weeks ago, you heard me bring his name up. Kind of got a little bit banged up at the beginning of the season. Then you heard me bring his name up as a deep threat for this team. A guy that could help stretch the field a little bit. And those are things that we want to keep an eye on. So hopefully he has been on your radar. For some of you, I already know that you've picked him up because we've had a chance to chat about it. But for those of you that haven't yet and he's still available and you need wide receiver help, help. He's going to be one of the better options, one of the safer options to add this week. 9 targets last week, up from 6 the week before. He caught 8 of those for 81 yards, back-to-back weeks with 80 receiving yards. He's not going to unseat Michael Pittman. We're not done with Michael Pittman or anything like that. That was a tough matchup last week. It absolutely was against Denver. Denver's defense against the pass has been pretty good this season. We're going to get Jacksonville, whose defensive line has been pretty good, has been causing a lot of pressure this year. But we're going to get Jacksonville this week, which could maybe be a little bit better for the secondary as long as Matt Ryan gets enough time to throw it. So Alec Pierce, definitely like his opportunity moving forward. Should be grabbing him up pretty quickly. George Pickens looks like he's becoming a favorite of Kenny Pickett, which I think is going to be very important for that offense moving forward, that Pickett establishes that relationship with somebody. 8 targets last week was still the lowest of the big 3. Deontay Johnson with 11, Claypool with 9, Kenny Pickett with 8. But his big play ability meshed with just his overall physical play, I think, is something that Pickett is really gravitating towards. Khalil Shakir from Buffalo. If McKenzie and Knox miss more time, we saw Shakir make it into the end zone this past week. Could see some decent targets. It might be more like defense dependent who they're playing that week. But he's going to be an afterthought. When you've got Gabe Davis, when you've got, obviously, Stephon Diggs, when you've got Josh Allen running the football, so you got to keep your eyes in the backfield a little bit. He's going to be an afterthought to defenses, and I think that could be a great benefit for Buffalo coming up, and especially in a matchup going up against Kansas City. We'll keep an eye on that this week and what happens with McKenzie, but Shakir could make himself a start this week. Nico Collins for Houston and Josh Reynolds for Detroit. Both of these guys are going to be buys this week, so they're not immediate adds any reason whatsoever, but they're guys that continue to have on our radar. If you don't have a priority ad this week, or if you've got a lower end ad where it's like, there's just nobody I'm really going to get anyway, maybe you go ahead and if guys, guys and gals, before you're going to be using up their waiver priority and you want to grab a Nico Collins or a Josh Reynolds, you can probably do it after waivers process. So you don't even need to worry about doing that. I would wait for these 2 guys. But for Nico Collins, not offering much upside right now. So again, that is going to keep us kind of off of him. But he has more yards this season than Brandon Cooks now after last week. Oh, and he has it on about 15 less targets as well. Nico Collins, again, not very high upside. He could be a guy that has a decent floor moving forward. And then for Josh Reynolds, another very good game for him. 10 targets, 6 receptions, 92 yards. Amon-Ra maybe still wasn't 100% sent this past week. And then again, obviously the Lions offense just played like absolute garbage on the road. But Josh Reynolds and Jared Goff obviously have that connection, and because of that, I definitely think he has unseated DJ Chark as the number 2 target in this team until Swift comes back. Diami Brown, I'm not excited about this ad whatsoever. A lot of it had to do with Dotson being out and so much focus being on Terry McLaurin and so much focus being on Curtis Samuel. Because of that, Diami Brown was just able to win a couple of decent matchups. 2 receptions, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. When you have a performance like that, you need to be on the waiver wire list, and I didn't want to leave him off and then have people be like, well, hey, Diami Brown, what do we think moving forward? Listen, moving forward, no, we're not on Diami Brown because Dotson's going to be back at some point in time. But this is going to be the deep threat for this team until Dotson comes back. So just keep an eye on it. If you're like in 16-team leagues, maybe take a shot at it. But other than that, not real interested in adding him. Michael Gallup, definitely a guy I want to add. We're seeing his production kind of take another little step forward. And I mentioned that last week. We might see some little steps. And then we're going to see him really bust open. And that might happen as Dak gets closer to returning and the deeper they can go down the field. Olamide Zaccheaus from Atlanta. Drake London beat up. Kyle Pitts beat up. Zaccheaus could be the number 1 in this offense over the next maybe couple of weeks, depending on how those guys. But really tough matchup coming up against San Francisco, so we're going to be completely off of them this week for sure. Randall Cobb for Green Bay. I mean, Watson sounded like he's dealing with a little bit of a hamstring issue still. A great performance. 13 targets, 7 receptions, 99 yards last year. Going up against the New York Jets this week. When we see a little bit of tougher matchups out on the outside, we could see Randall Cobb have another decent week coming out of the slot. And then Jacoby Myers for New England. I was absolutely shocked to see people had dropped Jacoby Myers so much. I mean, on Yahoo, it was either Yahoo or ESPN. I think he's down into the 30% for ownage. That's way too low. I mean, this is a guy that you should have been stashing on your IR for the last couple of weeks. He's back. Great performance against Detroit. Obviously, everybody plays against Detroit, but y'all should have been adding him last week. And I would have had him in the waiver wire video last week if I knew he was such a lowly owned player. But Jacoby Myers, y'all should have been grabbing him last week, knowing he was playing against Detroit, especially when we found out that he was good to go. So because of that, moving forward, we got to get him back on our roster. I mean, as far as wide receivers goes for New England, the dude leads the team in snaps and routes and targets and reset. I mean, the guy is the clearly the number one there when he's healthy and on the field. Just a couple of tight ends to potentially talk about this week. Bringing up Eric Saubert again for Denver. He's now the tight end one there. Saw 7 targets last week. Not great production from it, but keep that in mind as this offense starts to hopefully get a little bit better over the coming weeks. That Saubert is a guy that starts to kind of work his way into the rotation of targets, and that would be really great for his value moving forward and for fantasy owners. Cade Otton. Keep an eye on the rookie. 7 targets this past week after 4 targets the week before. Tom Brady, he does in the past like his tight ends. He's had Cameron Brate, though, and he's had other guys that he's worked with while being in Tampa Bay. And none of them have really had any type of fantasy value. But for Cade, I think we really need to keep him on the radar just because of those 7 targets last week. Hayden Hurst for Cincinnati. I mean, he got a chance to score against his old team, and he was second on the team in targets. Really the reason that we're adding Hayden Hurst here again, we saw a little bit of a drop-off in his ownership last week because of the fact that he was that we were seeing Higgins and Boyd and Chase healthy, and we were seeing Hurst, his targets drop each and every week. Because of that, maybe thrown over to the waiver wire a little bit more than he should have been. But if Higgins is going to be dealing with this knee injury for a significant time, then yes, Hayden Hurst is a guy that could end up still being fantasy viable for, some time moving forward. And then Taysom Hill for New Orleans. Some people had started to move away from him and drop him back into the waivers. I mean, this is a play at your own risk. I am not by any means telling you to go get Taysom Hill right now. He could get you 30-plus points like we saw this past weekend. He could get you 3 points. The problem is that Taysom Hill doesn't play a position. He's a gadget player. So they move him around and they do a lot of different things with him. So if they're able to hit on a couple of things, that's great. If they don't, then he's torched your fantasy lineup that week. Let's move into the streaming portion of our video, though, and let's talk about quarterbacks first. 3 different quarterbacks I think we could potentially stream this week. I'm going to bring up Kirk Cousins. Probably a little bit too widely owned, but if you're in a smaller league or a league with shorter benches or a league that doesn't really prioritize holding a second quarterback, Kirk Cousins may still be out there for you. They're going to get Miami this week, who's second in fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Again, probably not widely available for some of you to stream, but for smaller leagues that don't have smaller benches so they don't hold second quarterbacks, he might still be out there. Geno Smith, the dude, he took apart New Orleans, and New Orleans defense isn't all that bad, and he was able to go out there and find DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett for big days. So they're going to be getting Arizona this week. Could be a back and forth type of game, but honestly, Geno Smith is going to be the streaming option for really the rest of the season. The guy's just playing so well right now. And then Justin Fields for Chicago. This one feels a little bit icky with the way that he's played this year, but they are going up against Washington. That allows the 7th most fantasy points per game. And even though it was called back, we really got a chance to see a huge play on the ground from Justin Fields. And one of the things that we really want to see Justin Fields start doing a little bit more is use his legs and pick up some yards on the ground and maybe even score a few touchdowns. That would be really great. But going up against Washington, Justin Fields could be a really under the radar streaming option for you this week. A lot of risk with it, obviously, but could present a little bit of upside, or just a guy that's going to at least help you get through the week. And then for defensive special teams, 2 that I'm really kind of locked onto right now. The Bears going up against Washington. Wentz has been sacked 20 times this season, second most in the league. The Bears probably a little bit higher owned on this list than others, but they appear to still be available on most platforms. They look right around 50 to 60% owned. So for some of you, they might still be out there. Going up against Washington this week, really great option. And then Jacksonville. Jacksonville has actually allowed the fewest fantasy points, or excuse me, 5th fewest overall points like real life football, to opposing offenses this year. Jacksonville's defense, like I mentioned, they've got a really good defensive line. They can get at the quarterback a little bit. They can create some pressure. We know Indy's had some issues on the offensive side of the ball as of recent. Will Jonathan Taylor be healthy? Oh, and by the way, Jacksonville typically plays Indianapolis pretty tough. So Jacksonville could be a good streaming option this week for you as well. What about some players to drop? Chase Claypool, I'm going to bring him up again because I really think he's going to start settling into the number 3 option on this team. And then as soon as Najee Harris gets a little bit more healthy, we could see Chase Claypool even drop back to number 4. Maybe the good thing for his value right now is it appears Pat Freiermuth is going to be in the concussion protocol this week. And because of that, it might help him out a little bit, but I'm done with Chase Claypool right now. Chase Edmonds for Miami. Again, we're going to be keeping an eye on this. I don't know if I'm dropping him right away, but we're going to watch it because Myles Gaskin is getting touches. And if Myles Gaskin is getting touches, that's not great for Chase Edmonds. And if that's not great for Chase Edmonds, it is not great for our fantasy team. Mostert's definitely looking like the lead back right now. So Chase Edmonds may be a guy that we move on from here soon. Allen Robinson officially done with. Darrell Henderson may be done with pretty soon. I mean, Darrell Henderson, I think at one point had to leave the field this weekend. I know that he was standing over on the sideline with no helmet on. We saw Malcolm Brown come in at certain times. But, Darrell Henderson and Cam Akers, neither of them are really doing anything because this offense as a whole is it's just a mess right now. If you're not Cooper Kupp, this offense isn't doing anything for you. Tyler Higbee's a very safe tight end option right now, which is good that they're at least offering those up. Allen Robinson, though, Tutu Atwell, they looked at him deep. His first career catch this past year or this past week was able to really take the top off the defense. He might start getting some more looks. Obviously, there's other guys on the team right now that are getting looks outside of Allen Robinson. So unfortunately, at this point, Allen Robinson appears to be a waste of a pick. But he was a later round pick. For those of you that were taking him in like the 7th round, if you got to cut ties with him, that's okay. If you were taking him earlier than that, that probably wasn't the best idea. He was a guy that for us, we said, hey, in later rounds could absolutely be a guy that bounces back and helps out his team. But again, it was a later round draft pick because so many people were weary of him. But Elijah Moore, also a guy that we're being careful with now. Big playability of Garrett Wilson's going to be there. Corey Davis is a guy that's being very consistent for that offense right now. Elijah Moore hasn't been able to do anything. A preseason bust for me is looking like it right now. So if you do own him, we may have to toss him to the waiver wire here pretty soon. But ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. There are several options for you to potentially grab this week on your waiver wire. Make sure you're being careful with your waiver wire priorities this week. Don't waste a pickup on someone because, like I said earlier in the show, if you've got a guy like Kenneth Walker still out there and that happens earlier in the season, that is something where if you've wasted your waiver priority and now you've got like a running back one that you can grab, you're not even going to be in the running for it. So make sure that you're being careful with your waiver priority ads. If you've got fab left, spend it all on Kenneth Walker. Whatever you've got left, put it on Kenneth Walker this week. But ladies and gentlemen, hope you appreciate it. Leave me a comment down below if you've got any questions. I'll get to as many as possible. All of you have a great rest of the week. I'll catch you all in the start and sit videos here very soon. Peace out. Stay safe and stay healthy. I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.